Hey guys, tonight we're setting sail on a quiet creaking Viking longship. The mist rolls low over a grey fjord and your breath puffs in front of you like little clouds of warmth in the morning chill. You're barefoot on wet planks. The sail above flaps like a slow heartbeat, and everything smells like tar seawater, and that one guy on your crew who hasn't bathed since winter. There's no compass, no watch, and certainly no phone in your fur pouch. Just you, a hand-carved oar, and a vague sense that east is probably where the sun was 2 hours ago. Maybe. You're not sure what time it is. Not because you forgot to check your Apple Watch, but because it's 8:74 AD, and you're in Norway. The only clock around is the sky, and clouds, and maybe the way your boots are drying. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of the fjord longship, half loaded with supplies. Fishy-smelling sacks, dry peat bundles for fire, and one slightly suspicious barrel that someone swears is mead but smells like feet. The ship's prow curves up like a dragon's neck, gleaming with dew. A raven is carved into the tip. It always points forward always, but somehow it still helps you guess where you're going. The fog makes everything sound muffled. Even the crewmates arguing in Old Norse feel quieter. You breathe in the cold. It stings your nose. But you squint up at the clouds and grin, because today you're going to guess time without a clock and not die doing it. Probably. See, your captain thinks this voyage will take 6 days if the gods aren't grumpy. You're less sure. You know the coastline like? You know your own calluses, but out there on open water. No stars. No sun some days. Just wind and wave and guesswork. Historians still argue whether the Vikings were genuinely expert navigators or just incredibly lucky madmen in glorified canoes. The truth, like the weather, probably depends on the day. But one thing's clear, they didn't sail blind. They had tricks. Strange, clever, surprisingly effective tricks. You take your place near the front next to a pile of rough-cut shields, stacked like plates at a feast. Your oar is worn smooth from years of rowing, its handle shaped by thousands of palms before yours. A gull lands on the prow and squawks once, like it's warning you, or laughing at you. Hard to say. Then the captain barks something guttural, which your sleep-deprived brain translates to, "Let's go." The crew grunts, and suddenly you're gliding into the mist. The oars slap in rhythm. You feel the boat lean and shift with every stroke, like it's breathing with you. Time starts to feel slippery. You left the dock minutes ago, or maybe hours. The sun hides behind a thick quilt of clouds, and you find yourself watching the shadows of your crewmates instead. Are they longer? Shorter? Maybe it's lunchtime. Maybe it's still dawn. Who knows? One of the older rowers' life, whose beard might have its own beard, mutters that he can smell the mid-morning. You're not sure if he's joking. He licks his finger, holds it in the air, then nods, like that meant something. You just nod back. That's how you survive out here. The ship groans slightly as it catches a bigger wave, and the oar pulls against your arms like a stubborn goat. Your biceps protest. You keep rowing. Eventually, someone sings a verse of a sailing song, half humming it under their breath. The rhythm helps keep the pace. Somewhere to your right, the coastline fades in and out of view, jagged cliffs and pine trees that stretch like sleepy arms. You spot a distant waterfall, its silver line trembling in the breeze. That might mean you've gone 15 miles. Or 5. Time moves differently out here. You think about home, about the fire pit, and the dog that always sat on your foot, even in summer. You wonder how long it's been since you left. Half a day. One full turn of the sun. Your stomach's no help. It's been confused ever since that pickled herring incident. Still, something deep in you clicks into rhythm. A slow trust builds. The sea is ancient, yes, but it's also a calendar if you know how to read it. And you're about to. You close your eyes, feel the wind, the moisture on your face, the roll of the hull. You guess, just guess, that it's almost noon. You open your eyes. The clouds shift just slightly, and a shaft of sun breaks through landing square on your nose. Called it. The first thing you notice is your wool tunic. It itches. It's soaked from sea spray and clings to your ribs like a damp dog blanket. You shift in place on the bench, trying to scratch with dignity. No luck. Everyone's itchy. No one talks about it. Your hands are raw from rowing, knuckles gone pink and puffy. But what really bothers you is not knowing the time. Not in the way you miss a clock exactly, but in the way your brain quietly nags. Shouldn't the sun be higher by now? No one in your crew has a sundial. They don't even have numbers to spare for it. What they do have is a shared unspoken ritual watching the coast. You sit starboard side, right side if you fancy your eyes on the slowly moving shoreline. Norway's jagged edge glides by in peaks and pine green valleys. Everyone's looking for something specific. Not landmarks per se, but indicators. The way cliffs cast shadows, how bird flocks start acting weird, the color of the water near shore. Remember that squawky gull from earlier? Yeah, turns out he's smarter than most of the crew. The birds don't just mark land, they follow rhythms. Some go inland mid-morning. Others swarm fish schools at dusk. You don't check the time. You observe it feathered and flapping just ahead. And then, there's the real MVP of coastal timing, seabirds called kittiwakes. They cry like lost toddlers and dive in frantic patterns. The older rowers say they're the bell towers of the fjords. If the kittiwakes start crying all at once, it's probably close to midday. Or you're near a seal carcass. Either way, something's happening. Historians still argue whether these bird-based timing systems were formalized or just instinctive observations passed down through oral training. But from your bench, watching Bjorn grunt every time a puffin lands nearby, you figure it's a bit of both. Someone behind you spits into the sea and says, "We should be near Snake Rock soon." Snake. Rock. You glance at the shoreline confused. Then you spotted a twisting slab of dark stone that looks like it's writhing sideways from the cliff. You've seen it before. Last time you passed it, someone dropped a barrel of dried fish overboard. You're 90% sure that means it's about late morning. It doesn't sound like much, but to you that counts. You tuck the Snake Rock memory into your mental map somewhere between tree that looks like a troll and shoreline that smells weird. Another hour, or what you think is an hour, passes. You try to judge time by the sound of the waves. They slap the hull in steady rhythm like a lazy metronome. But then the wind picks up and the tempo shifts. Great, you're back to guesswork. Lithium. Wamiuintifs. Beard on beard. Leaf leans over and mutters, "Don't trust the gulls on cloudy days. They lie." Then he eats something that might be a pickled onion and stares off into the fog like a philosopher who lost his sandals. That's about when you notice the seabird chorus has quieted. The coastline flattens out. You've entered a stretch of sea the crew calls the mirror. It's unusually calm, barely a ripple. It reflects the sky like glass and makes everyone uneasy. Why? Because you can't tell up from down. And without waves or bird patterns, time vanishes. You try another method, counting breaths. Slow inhale, slower exhale, 100 times. That should be about 10 minutes. Right, maybe possibly. This is what Viking sailors did. They developed a sensory library. A personal Rolodex of sights, smells, sounds, even muscle memory. Not because it was poetic, but because it worked. You look left to the helmsman. He has one eye and a scar down his cheek like someone tried to carve a map on his face and gave up. He's muttering under his breath. Not prayers. Timers. You realize he's reciting rowing cycles. 34 pulls since Snake Rock. Multiply that by wind resistance, or possibly stew intake. Historians still can't agree if crews had standard counting rituals or just fell into rhythm like monks chanting by accident. Either way, it's weirdly effective. Suddenly, your bench shifts. The boat creaks loud and sharp. Ahead, a thin finger of rock juts out into the water. Everyone straightens. You hear someone whisper, "Cliff mouth." Another landmark. The crew nods as if a bell has chimed. You've crossed into the next segment of the journey. Not a time zone exactly. More like a natural chapter. And with that, it hits you. The Vikings didn't just guess time. They felt it like musicians hitting notes without sheet music. They used coastal cues, animal behavior, boat motion, and a hefty dose of stubbornness. And somehow, the whole voyage kept moving forward. You shift your legs, finally scratching that woolen itch. One foot's gone a little numb. You shake it out, watching the kittiwakes start up their shrieking again. Yep. Late morning. Nailed it. The clouds are thick now, a heavy woolen lid stretching across the sky, filtering sunlight into a pale, directionless gray. Your eyes ache trying to find the sun through that mush. The sea rolls gently, and your crew rows with a kind of bored rhythm. No urgency, no anchor for time. And then one of the young ones, Svein, whose name sounds suspiciously like a sneeze, pulls something out of a cloth pouch. It glints faintly in the dull light. A stone. Not just any stone. A sunstone. You lean closer. It's smooth and slightly translucent with a milky shimmer that dances when he rotates it. He holds it up, turns it slowly in the air and grins. There. You squint. There what? He explains not in words, but in that smug, younger sibling energy that the crystal reveals the direction of the sun even when it's behind the clouds. And just like that, your entire understanding of timekeeping shifts. Sunstones are real. We think. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly used them in daily navigation, or if it's more Norse myth than maritime reality. But archaeological evidence hints at calcite crystals found on old shipwrecks, and Icelandic sagas drop just enough vague clues to fuel centuries of speculation. The idea is simple. You hold the sunstone up, rotate it until you see a specific refraction pattern like a glow or double shadow, and bam, you found the sun. Even if it's hiding behind 10 layers of rainy sky. And your morale is somewhere between soggy and mutinous. Svein waves the stone like a magician revealing the time. You don't see it exactly, but the old helmsman nods, adjusts the sail by a few degrees, and the rowers change pace slightly. Just slightly. But enough. To make you wonder, was that all it took? Now you want to try. He lets you hold it. The stone is cool, almost damp, like it remembers being part of a glacier. You raise it, turn it again. There's a moment, brief, almost imaginary, when the milky haze shifts. A faint ring appears. Or maybe that's just your brain inventing patterns because it wants so badly for them to be real. But the moment matters. Not because it's perfect science, but because it's a system. It tells you something. Even if it's only the sun is probably over there-ish. It's better than nothing. And in Viking navigation, better than nothing is basically the gold standard. You return the stone and glance at the sail. The wind has picked up. Not by much, but enough to hum softly through the ropes. That hum changes pitch depending on the sun's angle, or the salt in the air, or maybe just how sleep-deprived you are. Regardless, it gives you a new idea. Maybe you can listen to the light. You lean back and watch how the clouds shift above. They aren't just dull gray, they're layered. Thicker up high with lighter bellies down low. And somewhere in those clouds, the sun keeps leaking through in barely there gradients. A trickle of brightness here, a faint warmth there. The sky becomes a kind of slow-breathing clock. The Vikings didn't just stare at it, they read it. They watched how the tone of the light changed. Yellow meant mid-morning. Pale white meant pre-noon. Faint amber edges, maybe early afternoon. If you were lucky, you'd catch that lavender fade that meant twilight was creeping in. But only if you were trained to see it. Someone sneezes behind you, Svein again, and the spell breaks. You're back to rowing clouds overhead, but with a strange feeling like you almost understand what time it is. You look over the side of the ship. The water is darker now. The reflection of the sail sharper. That probably means the sun has moved higher, changing the angle of light. Or it means you need a nap. Hard to say. Leif sits up and mutters something about sun ghosts. You raise an eyebrow. Turns out some Vikings believed the sun could pretend to be in a different place. Clouds played tricks. Sea spirits bent the light. So they'd consult the sunstone, then look for confirmation in the sea reflection. Double-check your source, basically. Even in 8 to 74 AD, nobody liked fake news. Historians are split on whether the sun ghost thing was a literal superstition or just metaphorical sailor speak for clouds are annoying. But either way, it added a layer of skepticism to the art of Viking time guessing. Never trust just one sign. Always have a backup. You admire that. Another gust of wind pulls the sail taut and the boat picks up speed. The horizon flattens and you see a tiny island coming into view. Leif counts on his fingers. Should be morning, he says with a grunt. That's not a real time, but weirdly it fits. You grip your oar and row. The muscles in your shoulders ache, but your brain feels sharper, more tuned in. Like you're learning a new language, except it's made of clouds, crystal and seabird screams. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the sail and splash of the oars, you hear it again. Time isn't ticking. It's whispering. You start noticing smells. Not in a poetic the sea breeze is rich with adventure kind of way, but in a more Viking way. A real way. Like how everything suddenly reeks of smoked herring damp wool, and whatever that one crewmate did in the corner of the ship when he thought no one was watching. But here's the thing, your nose is trying to tell you something. Time. The Vikings, for all their bravado and beard oil, lived by their senses. When the sun disappeared, the birds got quiet and the sea went still. They turned inward. They smelled the hour. That sour, sweet scent of bilge water getting warmer might mean midday. The faint waft of someone reheating last night's seal blubber soup. Probably lunch o'clock. Even the tar heating on the deck under filtered light starts to bubble and give off a sharper stink around mid-afternoon. You sniff the air. A hint of fire smoke. Not from your own ship, someone must be burning driftwood on a nearby island. Maybe a fishing camp. That means land. And land means you're approaching one of your waypoints. And waypoints mean, yes, time has passed. You're in a floating olfactory timepiece. Leif huffs loudly beside you and says, "Smells like we're an hour from shore." His beard twitches, like a compass needle. You want to laugh, but then you catch the same scent he did, a mix of pine resin and charred fish skin. He's probably right. Historians still debate how intentional this was. Did Vikings train their noses like bloodhounds? Or did it just happen after years at sea? Some theories even suggest they developed nasal memory, like an internal smell-based calendar. And honestly, after 3 days in a cramped boat full of sweaty men and open fish barrels, you believe it. You glance down at your boots. They're damp. Not soaked, not dry damp. That specific texture tells you it's been maybe 4 hours since you left the morning shoreline. The sun still hides, but your boots know. The ship creaks again. The sound of the hull shifts subtly, not louder, warmer. The wood is expanding in the weak sunlight. You can smell it now, baked pine pitch. A bit like incense, if incense was cursed by a Norse god. Another crewmate mumbles something about soup. The cook, if you can call him that, begins banging a dented metal ladle against the side of a barrel. The universal signal for it's ready now, and it was never good to begin with. You don't have watches, you have soup. Soup time might be the most accurate schedule on this ship. A bowl every 6 hours, give or take. Hot, salty, and always tasting vaguely of seaweed and disappointment. But dependable. And when the soup shows up, that means the captain agrees it's the middle of the day. The boat slows slightly and a few oars rest, while the crew slurps from wooden bowls. You join them sitting on a crate that leaks something you refuse to identify. The warmth of the soup surprises you. Not just because it tastes like boiled rope, but because it forces you to slow down, to listen, and to smell. That gentle scent of burning peat from the cook fire midday. The tang of salt crust drying on your tunic afternoon. The absence of fish smell because you're too far from shore, early evening's coming. You realize something strange. Time for Vikings was never exact. It was felt. Lived. Layered in tiny sensory fragments that piece together like driftwood on a tide. Someone farts. Loudly. Everyone groans. But Leif, ever the opportunist, grunts. That's the afternoon wind arriving. You spit soup back into your bowl laughing. But also, maybe he's right. Scent cues go beyond landmarkers. They even shift depending on the wind's direction. Southerlies bring warm air and brine. Northerlies bite with cold and the faint metallic scent of glacier runoff. If you paid attention and no one distracted you with gastrointestinal jazz, you could guess the time and the weather's future. One of the younger sailors points to the sail. It's dry now. Earlier, it was dripping from overnight fog. That drying process tells him it's been exposed for at least 3 hours, which, in longship logic, means it's just past lunch. Another crewmate confirms we'll pass the Split Tooth Rock before the sun sets. Split Tooth Rock. Another smell landmark. When you pass it, the breeze always carries this odd combo of sea kelp and bat droppings. Lovely, but accurate. Historians don't write about Viking noses enough. They focus on swords, ships, and sagas, but your nostrils are doing half the navigation work out here. You file away another detail when the water smells like rusted chainmail. Probably evening, when it smells like moldy goat cheese. Definitely, someone's lost their ration pouch again. And if you smell absolutely nothing, that means fog is about to roll in. You finish your soup and hand the bowl back. It's grimy and chipped, but the cook just dunks it in seawater and calls it clean. You sigh. The smell of sea-soaked wood and your own hands now carry a new meaning. Late day, slightly hungry, maybe one nap behind. The coastline curves gently ahead. The pine trees sway like they're waving at you. You catch a fresh breeze. It smells faintly of berries and moss. Even life perks up. There's the ridge. We're close. No clocks. No hourglasses. Just the world whispering its schedule through smoke, salt, and stew. Your nose may be working overtime, but now your face plays a role in this strange, smelly voyage of Viking timekeeping. Specifically, your nose's shadow. Yes, you heard that right. You're sitting near the front of the ship, soup-satisfied and pleasantly numb from rowing when Leif taps your arm with the stubby finger and grunts. Check your nose. It's noon. You blink at him. Sorry, what? He gestures toward your face. You follow his gaze and realize he's watching your shadow, more precisely the small, wobbly silhouette your nose casts down the bridge of your face. Here's the thing. When you don't have clocks, sundials, or any inclination to count beyond fingers and toes, you start getting creative. And what better portable sundial than the giant ridge sticking out of your own face? The trick is simple in theory, messy in practice. You tilt your face toward the light or where you think the light is. If your nose casts a shadow directly downward right between your lips, congratulations, it's probably noon. Probably. Historians still debate whether this nose shadow trick was an actual Viking technique or just a sailor's joke passed down because it sounded absurdly plausible. But there's something charmingly primal about it. It's your own face, no tools, no tricks. Just biology, physics, and a very cooperative sun. You try it now. The clouds have thinned slightly, just enough to let a watery glow filter through. You angle your face. Your eyes cross slightly, trying to follow the shadow. And there it is, a soft blur cast directly down the middle of your upper lip. It's oddly satisfying. You share a grin with Leif, who nods solemnly as though you've passed an ancient test. Then he immediately ruins the moment by picking something from his beard and flicking it overboard. You decide to explore this technique further. You glance around at the crew. Most of them aren't checking sundials. They're squinting into the wind, leaning into light, tracking how shadows fall on their hands, arms, or knees. It's almost subconscious. One young rower uses the edge of his oar to gauge the shadow angle. The thinner the shadow, the higher the sun. Thicker shadows must be sliding toward afternoon. The entire ship has become a human sundial, and because this is a Viking ship, where practicality often shares bunk space with weirdness, some sailors invent little nose rituals. You hear someone mutter, "If it's down the lip, you take a sip." That means break time. Shadow to the left cheek. Keep rowing. Shadow to the right. Time for a loud, unnecessary complaint. You try inventing your own rule. Shadow on the beard. You've earned a nap. No one listens. Still, it sounds catchy. The thing is, your face feels the sun. Not just in warmth, but in weight. Morning light presses softly on the left temple. Midday stabs straight into your eyebrows. Late day sneaks up from the right like a nosy neighbor. And the Vikings. They were masters of feeling light. They'd memorized what each part of their face felt like under each time of day. Not because they were mystical light benders, but because when you're rowing for 6 days across sea monster-infested fjords, you get bored. And you notice everything. Your tunic now hangs drier against your back. You guess it's been exposed for about 2 full sun peaks. That would be, 4 hours 6? Maybe more. Someone behind you mutters that the light now has a teethy edge. That's Viking slang for when the sun's warmth starts to wane, and a slight chill returns to the breeze. You decide it's around 2 o'clock. Based entirely on cheek temperature. Science. Not really. Useful, absolutely. Historians still argue whether these body-based sun measurements were learned techniques or just weird sailor habits that sort of worked. But when it comes down to it, you don't need precise minutes. You need to know when to shift the sail, when to pull ashore, and when to start boiling the next vat of mystery stew. Time doesn't have to be accurate. It just has to be reliable. And so your crew settles into its shadow dance. Faces turn gently every few minutes, not to stretch, but to check the light. Someone scratches a line into the side of a barrel, another hour, they guess. A shadow has shortened. A gull has vanished. The breeze changed key. You look again at your nose's shadow. It's angled now, a bit off center. Probably an hour past noon. You sigh, roll your shoulder, and keep rowing. In a few hours, your belly will grumble again. Your tunic will get damp all over again. And your nose, that noble timekeeping protrusion, will once more point you toward another Viking hour. By now, your arms ache like they've been forged from sourdough and guilt. The oar slides back and forth in its notch, worn smooth by generations of calloused palms. But despite the sweat, your mind's drifting watching the sea as much as rowing it. And then you see them fish. Not the dried ones in barrels or the oily ones in your soup. These are live darting shimmering schools of herring flitting like silver coins just below the surface. The boat glides right over them, and suddenly the sea seems to shiver with life. That's when the captain stands up and declares, "Fish time." You blink. What fish time, he repeats with the gravitas of someone announcing a royal decree. They're moving east. Late afternoon. Now you've heard of bird clocks, shadow clocks, even soup clocks. But fish clocks, turns out yes. The Vikings, when not yelling, raiding, or reciting sagas, were surprisingly attuned to marine life rhythms. Herring, for instance, move in dense schools based on sunlight, water temperature, and even time of day. If they're close to the surface and heading east, probably post-lunch. If they're deeper or angled southwest, get ready for dusk. And it's not just the fish. The gulls start circling more tightly above the ship, shrieking like teenagers at a feast. You've started to associate that particular volume of bird hysteria with the mid-late afternoon. Historians still debate whether Vikings truly read animal behavior as a formal timekeeping method, or if it was more like a mental association game. But when you're out at sea with zero instruments, watching a puffin dive becomes the next best thing to checking your phone. One sailor points to a fin slicing the water in the distance. "Seal patrol," he mutters almost reverently. "Seal patrol?" You follow his finger and spot them 3 or 4 seals, popping their heads above the waves in rotation, like they're checking in. The crew says the seals do this around the same time every day. You try not to imagine a group of punctual sea dogs with invisible wristwatches. But it's tempting. You can't help but smile. The sea isn't just wet, it's telling you things. Back in the stern, the helmsman mumbles something about gull to crab ratio. You don't dare ask what that means. Instead, you observe gulls are shrieking fish, are darting right to left, and a few seals are watching you row with what looks like mild disapproval. Therefore, it must be about 4-ish. You shrug. Good enough. Another crewmate joins in. Once I timed the crab walk against my nap schedule. Never failed. He grins, proudly. You realize the man has a literal crab time method. And you believe him. There's a rhythm to all of it. Fish are faster when the sun's at a certain height. Birds change direction with the shift in tide, which is in turn influenced by lunar phases and, of course, time of day. Everything becomes a dance. And the Vikings. They were just paying attention to the choreography. It's a different way of living, really. You're not telling the time. You're receiving it, like a whisper from the ocean. You peer into the water again. The herring are gone now, deeper maybe, or just scattered. A few gulls give up and perch lazily on the sail ropes, muttering to each other like bored accountants. The wind carries a cool touch that wasn't there earlier. The waves start to lap slower, heavier. Leaf stretches his back and declares fish time's past. Bird-watching hour begins. He's joking. You think. Regardless, it tracks. The energy on the ship dips. People stop talking as much. Some hum. One guy starts carving a whale into his oar. You swear you see another sailor try to whistle at a crab. And you just watch. The creatures of the sea and sky keep moving in patterns older than any ship or sail. You've started cataloging them in your mind. Puff and dive. Late morning. Gulls circling low. A mid-afternoon. Seals flopping west. Sun's probably behind you. It's not precise, but it's dependable. Historians like to ask, how did Viking sailors get anywhere with no maps, no clocks, and no celestial GPS? The answer might be simpler than they think. They just listened. To the fish, to the birds, to the waves, to the soft slapping language of water on wood. And now so do you. The sky is changing again. Not with thunder or storm clouds, but with color. You sit back on your bench arms, numb from rowing, watching as the light begins its slow transformation into something almost painterly. Earlier, it was gray, white, a dull soup of mist and morning. But now, the edges of the clouds glow faintly gold. The sea catches hints of rose and lavender. And you, Viking sailor extraordinaire, suddenly realize you're looking at a living, shifting timepiece, the sky itself. Leif, who never misses an opportunity to grumble poetically, points upward and mutters, "Sky's got pink edges." Means she's thinking about sleeping. You stare up. He's right. There's a warmth to the light that wasn't there an hour ago. A softer quality. Less harsh. Less urgent. More sleepy. This is how the Vikings read time on overcast days when the sun hid like a shy child behind clouds. They didn't need to see the sun. They read its presence through color. Historians call it sky gradient perception. Well, they don't really, but they should. And though few sagas mention it directly, it shows up in folk descriptions and poetic language. When the sky glowed like meat on a feast table, it meant evening. When the clouds were gray like stone wolves, it meant early morning. You start paying attention. Above you, the blue has faded into a softer slate. Near the horizon, a faint peach glow stretches like a ribbon. And though no one says it out loud, everyone slows down. The oar strokes get lazier, the creak of the boat gentler. The gradient is shifting. One sailor points out that on clear days they can tell time by how many layers the sky shows. Morning starts with a bold blue, then softens into turquoise. By midday, the overhead dome turns stark and colorless like bleached bone. Afternoon brings back the golds and twilight drips purple across the edges. Today, it's more subtle, like a watercolor painting someone smeared slightly with a wet thumb. You try another trick, tilt your head back and squint at the sky through your lashes. That's what the old navigators do. They say it filters the color better, makes it easier to spot transitions. You feel ridiculous, but it works. The top sky is still silver. The horizon has that warming blush. That's 2 layers. 2 layers. Late afternoon. Leaf gives an approving grunt. 2-layer sky. Time to stop rowing like a goat on fire. You slow your stroke, grateful. The wind now carries the unmistakable smell of wet pine. Somewhere land is near, and with it the day creeps toward its end. But you're not done watching. You start scanning for other color signs. The clouds shift tone from slate to salmon. The water itself reflects those hues, less blue, more purple-gray now. A nearby sail, once blinding white, now glows orange at its edges like a candle dipped in sunset. Historians still debate whether Viking ships used sky color as an intentional clock or if they simply associated hues with stages of travel. You suspect it was both. After all, the sky doesn't just mark time, it changes mood. And mood is just emotional timekeeping. You remember a phrase someone once mumbled during a misty sunrise: blue for beginning, red for return. You didn't understand it then. You do now. Your crewmates move slower. A few are rubbing shoulders, stretching backs. One begins humming something low and slow, almost a lullaby. The kind you'd hear drifting from a hut just before dark. The sail above you flutters differently, not with urgency, with rhythm. Like it too knows the day is exhaling. You decide to track the colors more deliberately. A single cloud, high and thin, turns gold at the top, gray at the base. That's a time marker. The sea shifts from steel to plum. Another marker. Even the shadow of the prow becomes longer, reaching toward the front of the boat, like it's chasing the horizon. You whisper to yourself, 3-layer gradient. That's Twilight's whisper. And in this moment, quiet, colorful, a bit damp, you feel like you're inside the hourglass. Not watching time pass from outside, but living inside its soft, glimmering particles. No bells, no numbers, just light and color. And the hush of men who know somehow without saying it that night is almost here. The shadows are getting longer now, stretching lazily across the deck like sleepy cats. But your attention isn't on the light anymore. It's on the sail. More precisely, on the way the sail casts its shadow. You sit facing forward, watching the enormous square of canvas above you sway gently. The mast creaks, the ropes groan, and the sail, usually just a piece of practical cloth, has become a massive sundial. At first you think you're just seeing shapes dancing across the deck. But then one of the crew, Tormund, who talks only when absolutely necessary, grunts and points at a thick diagonal shadow slicing across a pile of nets. It's 4 what hours since sunrise? Hours until Stu Tormund doesn't clarify. He just shifts his weight, tugs the oar once, and resumes staring at the shadows like they're runes waiting to be read. You begin watching more closely. The sail's shadow doesn't stay still. It creeps. It tilts. It fattens and narrows, depending on the sun's angle and the curve of the canvas. And it moves across the deck like some slow, lurching creature made of light. And just like that, the sail becomes your clock. Here's how it works as the sun crosses the sky, assuming it's even visible that day. The angle of light changes, and so does the placement of the sail's shadow. Early morning, the shadow hugs the left side of the boat. Noon. It disappears entirely beneath the mast. Afternoon. It creeps right, slowly chasing your foot, like it's got an appointment there. You start placing small objects along the deck shells, knots of rope, even a chicken bone you find stuck in a crack. You create a kind of DIY timeline. As the sail's shadow touches each item, you whisper a time midday, mid-afternoon. Don't eat that bone. Historians still argue whether Viking ships had formalized sail shadow techniques or if they just relied on instinct and repetition. After all, if you sail the same path every season year after year, you begin to notice when certain shadows hit certain planks. One theory suggests that some ships were even painted or marked with symbols, knots, scratches, tiny carvings meant to track time through the day, based on how shadows moved. Of course, most of those ships have long since rotted into the sea, taking their secrets with them. Still, the logic is solid. You don't need a sundial when your entire boat is one. You start leaning into it, tracking how long it takes for the shadow to move from the water bucket to the tool chest. It's not precise, but it's reliable. 2 songs. 1 full rowing cycle. 1 deeply uncomfortable stretch of silence after Leaf tries to tell a joke about Thor's sandals. You realize you're measuring time in moments rather than minutes. And, honestly, it feels more real. The sail above you flutters slightly, catching a new gust. The shadow dances, then settles again, now draped across a coil of rope near the prow. You remember it was hugging the stern before lunch. That means 2 things. The wind's shifted and the sun's moved. You're entering what some of the crew calls the leaning hour, when the sail's shadow gets tall, narrow, and stretches like a spear across the length of the ship. That usually means it's late afternoon. Or early evening, depending on how optimistic the stew smells. You glance over and see another sailor, Rurik, scratching something into the deck with his knife. A small line, then another. His eyes flick up to the sail, then down to the lines again. He's calibrating his own primitive shadow tracker. You don't dare ask if it works. He's the type who'd only answer in grunts or riddles. Another theory you've heard murmured among the crew: the placement of the shadow can even help predict the weather. If the sail's shadow moves too quickly, a storm might be brewing. If it stalls in one spot, the wind may die. You don't know if that's true, but you like the poetry of it. The shadow shifts again. It now stretches over the side of the ship, casting a rippling finger across the water. You can see it reflected faintly in the waves, a dark blade slicing the sea. You know that look. That sun-dipping shadow. The kind that only appears when the light is sliding downward, like someone gently dimming a lantern. Even the birds seem to notice. The ones perched on the mast begin to preen. One lets out a long warbling cry, the avian equivalent of almost quitting time. You sit back smiling. The sail's shadow is long, slow, soft, like the day itself is reclining. No bells ring, no clocks chime. Just this lightened canvas wood and guesswork. Time told in swaying threads and lazy angles. And you're starting to trust it. You hear the first splash before you see it. A heavy, deliberate plunk somewhere just off the bow. Then another closer. Not frantic like fish, not playful like dolphins. These are weighty splashes. And then, yes, there it is, a broad, slick bag, rising just above the surface, glossy as whetstone, followed by the graceful arc of a flipper. Whales. Or maybe seals again. Either way, your crewmates all shift slightly, eyes scanning the sea. No one says it, but everyone feels it another time. Cue. Welcome to whale time. You've heard Leaf mention it before, usually in a tone that suggests a mix of respect and indigestion. When the whales show, it's the hour of glide. A cryptic phrase if you don't know Viking sailor lingo. But out here, you're starting to learn that even the marine mammals have their own daily habits. Vikings, believe it or not, had names for different hours of the sea, and many of them weren't based on light at all. They were based on what the animals were doing. The morning hours belonged to birds. The midday was for fish. And late afternoon, that's when the sea mammals made their appearance. You spot another back cresting farther out, followed by a slow, almost lazy flick of a fluke. The water barely churns. It's like they're just drifting beside you, keeping pace. You glance up. The light has changed again, paler now, but still warm. The shadows stretch across the deck like weary limbs, and the breeze has shifted direction, slightly cooler now. The smell of fish oil and salt is sharp again, not stale. Seal o'clock. Leaf mutters. And sure enough, a bobbing head surfaces just a few feet away. Two blinking eyes staring at you with mild interest before vanishing into the depths again. Here's the thing. Historians still argue whether Vikings actively tracked time by animal habits, or if it was just superstition. But after a few days, it's obvious they paid attention. Animals follow cycles, and cycles mean predictability, which is exactly what you want when you're out on open water with no clocks, no sunstone, and only slightly reliable soup. You remember Svein telling you the seals come out in groups late in the day, not early morning, not high noon, just that window between heat and chill, right when the sky's starting to pale and the wind goes quiet. That's when the seal families pop up to do whatever mysterious seal things they do. Gather, stare, maybe judge your rowing technique. So now when the seals appear, you don't just see animals, you see confirmation. Another tick in the day's slow rhythm. The boat slows slightly. Not because the captain said so, but because everyone does it naturally. The rowing becomes softer, quieter. There's a respect in the silence, a kind of hushed acknowledgement that the world around you is participating in your voyage. You lean over the edge, careful not to tip the boat, and peer into the water. Below the surface movement flickers shadows of fish, drifting seaweed, maybe even a distant fluke. Everything feels suspended. The day is winding down, but it hasn't ended yet. There's that golden hour feeling like the sea is taking a breath before nightfall. Then you hear a faint whoosh of breath from a blowhole not far from the boat. You turn just in time to catch a spray of mist glinting orange in the slanted light. Whale time, you whisper. Even the crewmates nod. It's a good sign. Whales meant the ocean was healthy, meant you were on a safe track, meant the world was turning as it should. Some sailors even believed that seeing them at a certain hour brought luck. Others swore it was a warning to steer clear of icebergs. You don't see any ice. Just that glowing mist and a long, slow ripple across the waves. Your mind drifts to another fringe idea you heard once, that Viking navigators could sense the time of day by how the sounds of animals echoed off the water. Birds in the morning called higher and faster. Seals in the late day echoed wider and lower. Whales. Their song carried miles, and if you caught the tail end of one, it meant you were close to night. Probably nonsense, but here floating in silence, it feels just plausible enough. You sit back against a barrel. The seal heads are gone now. The gulls are quieter. The boat sways gently, shadows long and cool. The whale mist has disappeared behind a rolling wave. And just like that, you know, even without the sun, even without the birds, even without life muttering something questionable about barnacle behavior, you know it's almost evening because the sea has told you. Your stomach growls loudly. It's not polite or subtle. It's the kind of hollow echoing roar that turns heads and makes the nearest crewmate glance sideways with suspicion just in case you're about to eat someone. You felt it building for the past hour. That slow, curling hunger. The dull ache below your ribs. The slight twitch in your fingers. All signs that by Viking standards, it's probably food time. And so welcome to the most overlooked, yet shockingly accurate Viking timekeeper, your own body. The human hourglass. You lean back and take stock of your own symptoms. Your hands are stiff. Your knees feel like they've aged a decade. And your stomach. It's keeping the beat like a war drum. This isn't your first day out at sea. You've already started syncing with the rhythm of the voyage. Your body, despite its complaints, is adjusting, reacting, counting time in ways you don't fully understand. Historians speculate that Viking sailors, especially on long voyages, developed internal clocks based on bodily needs. Hunger, thirst, fatigue even, certain digestive patterns. And when you live in a world without alarms or alerts, your gut becomes the only reliable notification system. Case in point, the stew alarm. You smell it before you see it, a faint aroma drifting from the rear of the boat, peat smoke, dried fish, and the ever-present hint of fermented turnip. It's not gourmet, but it's there. And like clockwork, the stew arrives precisely when everyone begins feeling just a little too cranky. You glance up. The sun, now a diffuse golden disk, sits low in the sky. Shadows lengthen. The wind has gone lazy, and the birds are nearly silent. All of it lines up. This is feeding hour. And you knew it before the cook even started ladling that thick, suspicious gruel into wooden bowls. You take your portion and eat in slow, careful bites. It tastes exactly like yesterday and the day before. A little worse maybe because someone added dried onion flakes, but even that has its timing. Back in the bow, Leaf stretches his back with a groan that sounds like it came from the wood itself. Bladder says it's nearly dark. He mumbles, half joking. But you laugh because, yes, even that is a Viking clock. The bladder watch is a classic among sailors. Not refined, but reliable. Wake cycles, hunger, digestion, even joint stiffness. All of it tells you what the sun won't. You've heard tales of helmsmen timing watch shifts by how many cups of ale it takes before nature calls. Primitive, but effective. And here's where it gets more interesting. Your body doesn't just respond to time, it begins to anticipate it. After enough days at sea, you begin waking up just before your shift feeling thirsty, just as water's passed around, and getting that nagging soreness right around the rowing switch. You're syncing with the schedule of the ship, like your brain is learning tides instead of minutes. Historians still argue whether this internal clock was a trained habit or a natural adaptation. But recent studies into circadian rhythms suggest it might have been both. The Vikings exposed to daylight weather, physical exertion, and regular meals would have had one of the most consistent environmental schedules of any pre-industrial people. You sitting on this hard bench chewing chewy stew are beginning to appreciate that consistency. You stretch your legs. They creak like old door hinges. You flex your fingers, noticing how the cold is setting into your knuckles now. Another cue. You're not watching a clock. You are the clock. A sailor beside you lets out a long sigh and mutters, "Back's tight. Must be rowing change soon." Another sailor responds by tossing him a bone, literally, a leftover chunk of seal rib. That's how you mark the end of a shift on this ship hunger pain and an airborne snack. You take another bite, feel the warmth of the stew settle in your chest, and lean against the rail. Your gut says you've got 2 hours of light left. Your knees say it's been a long day. Your eyes are starting to sting from wind and sea spray, and your ears have tuned into the slight hush that settles when the birds stop calling and the crew stops joking. It's all there, telling you with no words, no watches, and no need for precision. The day is winding down. And your body knows. You open your eyes and squint, then immediately regret it. The sun is still up, not blazing, not overhead, but stubbornly hovering just above the horizon, casting long, honey-colored streaks across the sea. You were sure it would have set by now, but you forgot one crucial detail. You're way up north. The kind of north where summer barely lets the sun sleep, where night is more of a suggestion than a reality, where darkness tips its hat politely, but doesn't stick around long enough to be useful. Welcome to the land of eternal dusk. And here's where Viking timekeeping gets truly complicated. See, when you sail this far toward the Arctic, days don't behave normally. The sun sets late, or not at all. Sometimes it dips, thinks about leaving, and then changes its mind, which means shadows lie, stomachs get confused, and your brain, it slowly melts into a sleepy pudding. You stretch, unsure if you've napped for minutes or hours. There's no change in brightness, just a golden sameness that drapes the world like warm fog. Everything looks stuck in about 7:30 p.m. for hours. The crew feels it too. One sailor yawns so hard he almost swallows a button from his tunic. Another wipes his eyes and mutters, "Still light. I thought we hit midnight." Someone points at the sky and jokes, "Maybe we're dead and stuck in Valhalla's waiting room." You smirk, but deep down, you get it. When the sun refuses to set, your internal clock starts glitching. You can't trust the usual markers. No nightfall, no stars, not even the cooling drop in temperature that usually signals evening. It's all the same. Historians still argue whether Viking navigators preferred summer sailing because of the long daylight, or if they dreaded it for this exact reason. Without true darkness, it's harder to measure the passage of time. And yet paradoxically, they managed. You're beginning to see how. Because when the sky won't help, the Vikings looked inward. You start paying attention to your thoughts, your emotions, the weird little mental signals your brain sends out when it's tired, confused, or somewhere in between. You notice that you're thinking slower now. Your muscles still work, but there's a heaviness in your limbs. You're not sleepy in the classic sense, you're mentally foggy, like someone turned the sharpness down on your thoughts. that you realize is your circadian compass trying to recalibrate. It knows you should be winding down, even though the sun refuses to play along. So you begin marking time by dream logic. How long have you been rowing in this not evening light? When did the wind die down? Was it before or after Leaf started talking to his oar like it owed him money? Another crewmate begins softly humming a lullaby, maybe. The tune floats gently above the sound of the water. You can't tell if he's serenading the sea or trying to lull himself into some kind of rest state. You realize people are trying to sleep. Right now, in this golden light, blankets come out, cloaks pulled over faces. Some curl into corners of the ship like cats in a sunbeam. Because here bedtime isn't marked by stars. It's marked by exhaustion. You lie back using a coiled rope as a pillow and close your eyes. The sun is still up, but your mind is done. Historians call this period the white night. Not quite day, not quite dusk, just an extended blur of semi-alertness. For Vikings, especially during long summer journeys, this was when mistakes happened. Navigational errors, missed landmarks, drifting too far west when you swore you were going north. So what did they do? They invented dream cycles. Every few hours, one crew member rests while another quietly watches. No alarms, no wake-up calls. Just a silent agreement that someone would always be aware. And when they couldn't trust shadows or birds or even their own stomachs, they trusted their instincts and their dreams. You drift now, not fully asleep, not fully awake. You're aware of the boat's motion, of the light pressing gently against your eyelids, of the occasional splash from a seal that thinks it's funny to sneak up on sailors. But mostly, you feel time as a pressure. A soft hum, not moving forward but around you. You have no idea what hour it is. But you know you're in that rarest of Viking hours, the hour of drift, the hour of stillness, the hour where time forgets how to count. And for once, you're okay with that. You awaken not to a sound, but to a feeling. A slow, repetitive push and pull beneath your ribs like someone is gently rocking your spine with the tide. You blink your eyes open. Same golden sky. Same creaking ropes. Same unhelpfully present sun. But the rhythm is different now. The boat sways in a deeper, slower pattern. Less of a wobble, more of a lull. Each roll of the hull feels longer, smoother, like the sea has settled into a bedtime heartbeat. And then it clicks, you're counting the waves. And unintentionally, you're telling the time. Wave rhythm counting isn't something you ever expected to use, especially not as a Viking. But the more days you spend on this ship, the more obvious it becomes. The sea has its own tempo, and you can feel it in your bones. You sit up slowly, your back stiff, and look across the water. The ripples are wider now, rolling in from the west, like a slow tide of syrup. Earlier, they slapped the hull quickly, almost impatiently. Now, they just lean against it. Each roll takes longer. You start counting silently, gently. 1, 2, 3. You imagine a metronome set by Odin himself, a sea lullaby in tempo 4/4. Historians rarely mention it, but there are sagas with vague references to the rocking hours when the waves grow slower and wider as the sun slides into its lowest path. Fishermen would return by this rhythm. Traders would rest when it slowed. Warriors, well, they probably ignored it entirely unless the sea tossed them into it. But you feel it. Even the oars, when they dip into the sea, now make a different sound. Earlier they slapped, now they swoosh. A soft, drawn-out pull. It's like the ship is sighing. Or maybe the sea is. You remember Leif once said, "You know it's past dinner when the sea stops arguing." You thought it was nonsense. But now, it tracks. And it's not just the waves. It's your body. Your muscles move differently to this rhythm. Your eyes blink slower. Even your thoughts stretch out like they've been unspooled. The sea's cadence isn't just a clue to time. It's dragging you into its schedule, one quiet sway at a time. You walk to the side of the boat and stare at the horizon. Still golden. Still infuriatingly not night. But the reflection of the waves has changed. The ripples are longer now, striped with copper and violet, like the sea is dressed for bed. One of the crew hums something again, a low tune in time with the waves. You start tapping your foot without meaning to. Your pulse matches the motion. 4 heartbeats per sway. It's hypnotic. You could count minutes like this, or hours, or lifetimes. The best part, you don't need to think. You feel the passage. This might be what some scholars have called tactile chronometry, the idea that time can be felt through motion and pressure instead of seen. It's not proven, but it makes sense out here. On long journeys, Vikings didn't always have stars, or birds, or sunstones, but they always had the sea. The rhythm of waves became a kind of aquatic clock. If you knew your destination and you knew how the sea moved, you could guess where you were and how long it had been. You try again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. The ship dips. You adjust your stance like you're dancing. No one taught you this. Your legs just know now. And that's the real secret, isn't it? Viking navigation wasn't about data. It was about sensation. It was about muscle memory, gut instinct, and the kind of environmental awareness that modern sailors would kill for. The boat sways again. You close your eyes. You can feel the hour. You don't know the number, but you know the mood of it. This is the hour of quiet motion, of deep waves, of long blinks and shorter words. The wind doesn't whistle, now it whispers. The sail doesn't flap, it rests. You open your eyes just in time to see a gull gliding, not flapping across the water. That's another sign. At this hour, they conserve their energy. You smile to yourself. You've cracked it. You can now tell time by the sway of the sea. And it's probably late evening. Give or take a heartbeat. The sea is calm. The kind of calm that whispers secrets if you're still enough. The waves roll slower now, not in rhythm with your rowing, but in harmony with the coming hush of night. You sit there quiet, half listening to the wind when something catches your ear. A grunt. Not just any grunt, that grunt. The one that sounds like someone's clearing their throat inside a barrel of gravel. It comes from the back of the boat where Ulf is adjusting his seat. He's a large man, too large for quiet. But what strikes you isn't the grunt, it's how different it sounds. Earlier in the day, the crewmates' voices bounced off the water. The air was crisp, the sounds traveled sharp and bright. But now, even Ulf's signature huff sounds softer, more muted, like someone's thrown a wool blanket over the entire ocean. You listen again. A sneeze barely echoes. A whisper from Lee fades before reaching the mast. Your own breath seems to sink instead of scatter. The soundscape has changed. The sea isn't louder, but the world is quieter. And suddenly you remember what Leaf once said. Half asleep dusk comes, when even sound gets sleepy. Turns out he was right. Historians still debate whether Vikings consciously used sound behavior to judge time, but folklore makes subtle mention of it. Hunters claimed you could tell when to return from the woods by how distant your shouts sounded. Fishermen marked the end of the day by the dulling of the ocean's voice. And now, on this boat, you get it. The difference is subtle but unmistakable. Earlier, when you spoke, your voice skimmed across the water like a stone. Now it sinks. You clap once quietly, and it feels like the sound doesn't go anywhere. Just drops into the air and disappears. There's also a tonal change. You start humming out of curiosity. A low note. It sounds warmer, rounder. Not because of your technique, you have none, but because the air has changed. The temperature's dropped. Not much, just enough to thicken the space between your ears and the world. Cool air carries sound differently. It's less crisp, more mellow. The ship has become a floating, creaking lullaby box. You turn to speak to the sailor next to you, but pause. Do you really need to? There's an unspoken rule now: voices should be gentle. You half whisper, "What time do you think it is?" He shrugs. "I think it's listening hour." Listening hour. You love that. That space between sunset and actual night where the light doesn't tell the truth, but the sound does. You take a deep breath, ears open. You can hear the creak of ropes, the soft slap of water against the hull, a bird crying faintly in the distance, probably a curlew. Its call is higher pitched now, almost sad. You've heard it before during the same part of the journey, like it's trained to announce the arrival of evening. And then comes a strange sound, the faint clack of beads. You turn to find a sailor counting them, tiny carved pieces of bone strung on a cord. He flicks them one by one, each clack barely audible. A timekeeper, a prayer. Maybe both. You watch for a while, then close your eyes again. You realize something else: sound also changes based on the direction of the wind. Earlier today, the crewmates on the far side of the ship were crystal clear. Now their voices are muffled. The wind has shifted slightly off starboard. A damp, cold whisper. It pulls sound sideways, bends it. The effect is strange. The boat feels larger somehow. Like voices need to travel farther, even though you're sitting just feet apart. You tap the wood beside you. It echoes with a dull, hollow tone. You do it again. Still hollow, but softer. The boat itself seems to be responding. Earlier, it was a musical instrument. Now it's an old drum muffled by time. Somewhere aft, someone sings a soft verse of an old saga. You can't make out the words, but the tune, you feel it ripple through the air, not because it's loud, but because everything else is so quiet. Sound becomes the clock. When everything softens, when voices fade, when splashes hush, that's how you know the day is fading. Not just in light, but in tone. And when the world grows this quiet, you whisper too, because it's evening. And the air is listening. You're watching Leaf again. But not his beard this time. His beard, to be clear, is still epic. But it's not flapping in the wind, or curling at the ends, or catching crumbs like it usually does. No. Tonight, it's organized. Braided. Knotted. You narrow your eyes. That wasn't there before. Life notices your stare. He raises an eyebrow, pats the end of his beard fondly, and says, "Hour knot." You blink. What, every hour I tie one? You stare harder. There are 4 knots in his beard. You look up. The sun's about to dip below the horizon. If you had to guess, really guess, you'd say it's just past 8. So, 4 knots since mid-afternoon. That tracks. This man has turned his facial hair into a timekeeping device. Of course he has. Turns out Leif's beard is more than an ornament, it's a method. He's not alone either. In a world with no clocks, you get creative. And if you've got something that grows, hangs down, and is in your line of sight at all times, why not use it? Leif ties one simple knot every time he feels the shift. Not just any shift, a time shift. A change in wind, a certain angle of light, a specific tone in the birdsong. He feels it, reaches up and ties one neat loop. It's part meditation, part journal, part weird old guy energy. And it works. Historians still argue whether beard knotting was an actual Viking practice or just an old sailor's superstition. There's no archaeological proof, obviously beards don't fossilize. But oral traditions and folk stories sometimes mention braided beards with wisdom knots or honor loops. Could it be a reference to timekeeping? Possibly. You want to test it, so you try it yourself. You don't have a beard, not like Leif. But you have a strip of leather hanging from your belt. You tie a knot in it, one for the current hour. You decide to track each felt passage of time moments that change something. After about 30 minutes, you tie another. It's oddly satisfying. You're no longer watching time drift by, you're marking it. And you realize maybe that's the whole point. Timekeeping in the Viking world wasn't about control. It was about acknowledgement. A way to show respect for each passing phase. To say I was here. I noticed. Leif touches the second knot, tracing it with his thumb. This one was when the gulls vanished, he says. Next one was when the tide flipped. He grins. Might tie one for that weird story Svein told too. Time kinda stopped during that. It's not just quirky. It's personal. You watch the others. Some trace tally marks into the edges of their wooden bowls. One knots a thin strip of sailcloth. Another arranges pebbles in a circle beside his seat, adding one each time the shadows grow noticeably longer. Viking clocks aren't mechanical. They're emotional. They're physical. They're interactive. It's not about precision, it's about presence. Later, as the sun finally brushes the sea, you glance over at Leif again. He's tying a 5th knot now. Hands steady. Movements slow. He's not rushed. He's acknowledging. You hear the soft scritch of the braid sliding through his finger, the gentle tug of the loop, pulling tight. That sound, that tiny sound, that's the hour ringing. And for a moment, you don't miss clocks, or calendars, or blinking numbers. You have knots. You have rhythm. You have a string that tells your story. You start to feel proud of your leather strap. 2 knots so far, but meaningful ones. You tie a 3rd knot because time demands it, but because the moment does. A gust of cooler wind sweeps across the deck. Another hour shifts. Another story begins. And somewhere on the end of Leif's beard time, quietly ties itself into memory. It begins with a voice. Low, steady, familiar. Svein, the youngest of the crew, speaks in that dreamy rhythm you've come to associate with late evenings on the water. But he isn't just rambling. He's telling a story. And not just any story. A saga. You sit up a little straighter, elbows resting on your knees, the oar set aside. Around you, others lean in, some sipping from dented mugs, some chewing lazily on the last of their dried fish. Everyone's listening, because this is one of the most ancient and strangely accurate timekeepers of all story pace. Vikings didn't just pass time with tales. They measured it with them. You've heard it mentioned before casually in passing that some sagas were used like sandglasses. A full version of the tale of Greta the Strong might take a whole watch shift. A snippet of the Nibelung Ring. Maybe just enough to get through one rowing cycle. And tonight, Svein is clearly reciting something he's measured before. His voice flows with the confidence of someone who knows that the end of his tale will land right when it should. You settle into it. He begins with a familiar beat. There was once a farmer, strong in back and weak in temper, who lived near the edge of the world. The ship rocks gently beneath you, and you match the rhythm of the waves to the rise and fall of his words. 10 minutes in, you notice something odd. He's pacing his speech. Not just for drama, but for timing. He pauses in predictable spots. He stretches certain syllables. Not to fill space, but to fill time. You glance around. The others aren't watching him. They're watching the sky, the sail, the sea. But their ears are locked on his voice. Because they've heard this story before, and they know exactly where they'll be when he finishes it. Historians have long debated whether Viking sagas were structured intentionally to fill specific blocks of time, like a spoken hourglass, or whether it was just coincidental repetition. But seafaring communities were notoriously practical. If you knew a tale took exactly the length of one watch, why wouldn't you use it? It's oral tradition, yes, but it's also timekeeping. You close your eyes for a moment, letting Svein's words roll over you. The tale twists and turns. A betrayal, a storm, a bear that speaks only in riddles. You lose track of the details but not the pace. It's soothing, hypnotic. And then halfway through a sentence, Svein pauses mid-word. He grins. Time for the switch. Without another word, two sailors stand up and swap rowing places. Another takes over lookout. Svein continues exactly where he left off without even blinking. It's seamless. You glance at your leather strap. Another knot. Because the end of part 1 of the saga always means exactly 1 hour has passed. You whisper it aloud just to hear the shape of its story clock. Svein's not the only one. Later, Leif will hum a song that always lands on its final note just as the stew begins to bubble. Rurik will chant a riddle that lasts from one fire watch to the next. Even you're beginning to feel the tug of time inside words, inside rhythm. The story winds on. You follow it loosely, now lulled by its repetition. But your body is marking each beat. Each plot twist becomes a time anchor. Villain appears. That's 15 minutes in. Hero departs. That's halfway. Bear fight 3/4 mark. Resolution 1 hour on the dot. No one says it, but everyone knows it. Even the sea seems to follow the cadence, lapping at the hull in agreement. The sail shifts slightly, catching just enough breeze to glide your longship forward, like it too is being carried by the tail. And when Svein reaches the final line. And so the farmer returned wiser, wetter, but not 1 coin richer. Everyone nods. Someone claps quietly. Another crewmate stirs the stew. Exactly 1 hour. Exactly the right time. No bell needed, just words and memory. And a story so well worn it's become its own sundial. You smell it before you feel it. A creeping, pungent presence, like someone dropped an old leather boot in warm fish oil and stirred in regret. Your eyes water. You wince. It's back. Seal stew. Again. You take a hesitant sniff of your bowl and swear under your breath. It's the same pot from earlier, just thicker, saltier, more defiant. Whatever was floating on top earlier has now sunk into a kind of primordial sludge. You stare at it and realize with dull horror that your stomach is already reacting, not out of hunger, out of habit. Because this is when it always happens. Roughly 6 hours after your last real meal, the infamous gut time method kicks in. In Viking life, your stomach doesn't just complain, it becomes a reliable internal timepiece. Not because you trained it, but because it had no choice. Historians rarely mention digestive rhythm in Viking navigation, but sailors across cultures have talked for centuries about meal cycles. 3 times a day. Not out here. You eat when the captain says you eat, or when the cook starts scooping fermented protein from a barrel and no one stops him. But somehow your gut knows. This is hour 6. The churning begins, the acid wakes up, and the body, bless its squelching honesty, lets you know that the stew has reached cruising altitude. You take a bite. It's worse than expected. Not in a badly cooked way, but in an intentionally unsettling way. Like the cook added something he shouldn't have. Like seal fat and desperation. Someone groans behind you. Gut says night's coming. Leaf mutters, clutching his belly. Just like yesterday. And it's true. Your digestive system has mapped the day. You didn't mean to let it, but it happened. Breakfast stew hits at morning wind shift. Midday moosh happens exactly as the sail's shadow slides past the third bench plank. And this evening horrible. It shows up right before the wind goes dead and the sky turns navy. You realize something else. It's not just when the stew is served. It's when the stew strikes. You could set a watch to it if you were into that sort of thing. Even the newer crew members are starting to catch on. One rookie sailor, pale as a winter moon, mutters that he felt the fish go swirl and knows it's after sundown. You don't ask for clarification. You know what he means. Your stomach agrees. Historians still argue whether the Vikings intentionally used digestion as a way to gauge the passing of time, or if it was just a symptom of strict rations and unchanging meals. But modern sailors, especially those on long hauls, often report similar experiences. The body adjusts. It learns the rhythm. It warns you. Sometimes in very unpleasant ways. You clutch your gut and shift your weight on the bench. It gurgles, not politely, loudly. Someone nearby chuckles. That's your second cycle, right? They ask. You nod sheepishly. Mid-gut time. Classic. Another sailor across the deck points at a crewmate groaning into his cloak. He's on cycle 3. Past midnight. There's a grim kind of camaraderie in it. You all know where you stand, not just by the stars or the sea, but by the strange symphony playing in your intestines. A gust of cooler wind hits. You burp involuntarily. That's your cue. You glance at the sky. The clouds are gone, the horizon a smear of deep plum and charcoal. The sun has finally tucked its head behind the edge of the world, and the moon, faint, pale, non-committal, glows like a wet coin in a pocket. Night at last. And your gut predicted it 5 minutes before the sky confirmed it. You wish it had been wrong. But in this ship among these strange hungry men, your digestive tract has become a respected authority. No one wears a watch. They wait for someone's stomach to announce the next shift. You take one last brave bite of the stew. It doesn't fight you as hard this time. Maybe your gut is resigned. Maybe it's gone numb. You set the bowl aside and sigh. Cycle 3, you murmur. Your stomach gurgles in agreement. And just like that, the hour turns. Not with a bell. Not with a shadow. But with a burp. And the solemn nod of a sailor whose gut just earned him 5 minutes of fame. You finally look up, really look, and there they are. Stars. It takes you a moment to trust your eyes. After all, it's been a long stretch of pale sky that refused to darken as if the sun had performance anxiety. But now, in this quiet hour, tiny white flecks start popping out, faint at first, then stronger. You exhale. It feels like a curtain has lifted. And with that single breath, the ancient clock in the heavens starts ticking again. You're in the part of the Viking day where celestial navigation returns, assuming the clouds don't roll back in like a grumpy guest. Tonight, you're lucky. The sky is patchy but clear enough. You start scanning instinctively. There, the Big Dipper, or at least 5 of its 7 stars. The bottom curve of the ladle is slightly tilted tonight. Below it, a faint smear. That could be the North Star. You adjust your posture like it matters. The old man at the stern, whose name might actually be Grunt, tilts his head and says, "Star tilt says it's near midnight." You nod, unsure if he's being literal or poetic. Probably both. The Vikings were famous for using the stars to navigate, especially when out of sight of land. But what's less commonly discussed is how they may have used the movement of constellations to estimate time, not just direction. If you know where a star was and where it is, then you can guess how long it's been. Not with precision, but with confidence. Historians still debate whether the Norse had formalized star maps or if they relied entirely on memory and tradition. Some evidence points to basic star compasses. Others think they memorized sky rhythms the same way they memorize songs or sagas in loops by feel. You believe it now, because you can feel the change. Earlier the sky was navy, now it's ink. The stars sharpen, the wind cools your cheekbone just enough to raise goosebumps. This is not early night. This is deep night. Time by texture. A sailor next to you points overhead. When that one he taps the sky gets behind the mast, we change row guards. You follow his finger. It's a faint yellow star just past the edge of Cassiopeia. He's marked it. Not officially, no carvings or measurements. Just a mental stamp. When that star moves past the vertical line of the mast, his shift ends. You wonder how long it takes to learn that kind of spatial rhythm. You lie back against the wooden deck, eyes wide to the sky. The boat creaks around you like a cradle. The sail no longer flaps. It shivers now gently with the hush of night air. Above the stars arc slowly. If you hold your gaze long enough, you can see the sky turning. Not visibly, more like the way you notice a bruise changing color over time. It's subtle, patient, predictable. You close your eyes for a moment, trying to feel what the Vikings felt. A drifting boat, a cool wind, a stomach full of regretful stew, and the sky whispering the hours in constellations. You open them again. The Big Dipper has moved just a fraction, but enough. You guess it's been 15 minutes, maybe 20. You sit up. Leaf's awake again. He stretches, looks upward, and mutters, "She's got another turn in her before dawn." He's talking about the stars, of course. Like they're part of the crew. Maybe they are. Another sailor taps the mast and says, "Star time." No one argues, because out here the stars don't lie. Well, unless it's cloudy. You glance at the horizon. A faint bank of fog is creeping in from the east. The kind of fog that has a schedule. The kind that snuffs out stars like wet fingers on a candle. You memorize the sky while you still can. There's Orion's belt. Faint, low, almost out of season. Polaris steady and smug. And those two bright ones near the prow they've been tracking together since late dusk. You name them Stew and Knotbeard, just to keep things entertaining. Your eyes blur, not from tears, just from watching. You realize this is Viking night vision, not just with eyes, but with memory. You don't see stars. You remember where they were, and that somehow becomes time. You lie back once more. The fog is winning, but it's okay. You've already set the clock. In your head, in the sky, and somewhere on a boat made of pine and persistence, the hours drift forward in starlight. A soft flutter cuts through the silence. Wings. You sit up scanning the night sky, if you can call it that. The fog has nearly swallowed the stars. The sea is calm, and the ship drifts like a forgotten thought. Then from the gloom it appears a raven. It glides low over the boat, dark against dark like a shadow that detached itself from the night. One flap, two. Then it's gone, fading into the gray above as silently as it came. You look at Leaf. He grins. Birds on schedule. You blink. Scums, Gurusakarinja. Schedule, he nods toward the fog. They return when the moon is halfway. That was Hrafen. He'll circle twice before landfall. You frown, a little impressed, a little unnerved. You've heard of the famous Raven time. The concept sounds like something a drunken poet might invent. But out here, cold exhausted adrift, it's starting to make eerie sense. In Viking lore, ravens weren't just scouts, they were calibrators. Released during travel to find land. Yes, but also to gauge distance and even time. You've heard stories of captains who claimed they could tell the hour by the flight pattern of a raven. If it wheeled twice and vanished, it was early. If it flew straight and returned, midday. If it didn't return at all, either land was close, or the raven had better plans. Tonight it's Hrafen. Or, so Leaf says. You suspect he calls every raven Hrafen to make himself sound mysterious. Still, the bird appeared exactly when the fog thickened and the stars died. Coincidence? Maybe not. You glance toward the mast where another sailor stands perfectly still, arms crossed, gaze upward. He's listening for a second pass. Not watching, listening. Because ravens don't just fly, they call. And each call means something. You hear it, then crack sharp nasal brief. It comes from somewhere behind the ship. Rurik turns his head slightly and says, "Right on time. You're starting to think everyone here is in on some ancient avian conspiracy." Historians still debate whether raven-based timing was symbolic or practical. Were the birds just mythologized GPS, or did Norse sailors truly build schedules around their habits? The sagas certainly elevate ravens, Odin's own companions. Hugin and Munin were said to fly out each morning and return each evening with knowledge of the world. Knowledge, and maybe a timestamp. You hear another cry, farther away now, a little lower. Leif closes his eyes and murmurs. He's banking inland. We'll pass the ridge by third twilight. You don't ask what third twilight means. Frankly, you're still figuring out what first twilight was. But you watch the sky. Sure enough, another shape cuts across it. Wings outstretched, tilting left. A second raven, or the same one returning for round 2. It dips low over the sail, then rises sharply. That's a signal. Rurik grunts and begins shifting the tiller, adjusting the rudder with practiced lazy grace. He's leading us. Again, he says more to the boat than to you. You squint through the fog and catch a faint shimmer on the horizon. Could be moonlight on water. Could be the edge of land. Either way, the bird was the first to find it. That's why Vikings trusted them. Not just to scout, but to reveal. To say in flaps and angles and barely audible cries, you've been out here long enough. And somehow, they were always right. You begin to wonder if this raven thing could work for you. You reach into your satchel and pull out a crust of bread. Maybe next time you could train your own scout. 1 flap means soup. 2 flaps means sleep. Leif sees you and laughs. They only answer to Odin, he says, and occasionally to Stu. You laugh too. But the moment feels sacred. The fog parts slightly. The moon is visible now, a soft cracked pearl in the sky. Below it, the raven wheels once more before vanishing into the mist. And in its wake, the ship turns slightly. You don't know the time. But the raven does. And out here, that's good enough. You're awoken by the soft shuffle of feet and the sound of someone muttering curses at a tangled blanket. It's the changing of the watch. In a Viking crew, there's no bell to toll, no formal handoff. Just the sound of one tired body sliding off a bench while another groans and takes their place. You sit up groggy and blink at the dusky haze that still clings to the sky. It might be midnight, or 2 in the morning, or 4. Doesn't matter. It's your turn. You climb to your post, rubbing your eyes and feeling every knot in your spine. Around you, the others shift silently. Some sleep sitting upright, heads tilted like sad gargoyles. Others lie fully sprawled, hugging bundles of cloth or sacks of something probably ineatable. But 2 or 3 of you stay up always. That's the rule. Welcome to the ancient system known as the watch rotation trick. Each crew member takes turns staying awake while the others rest. The trick isn't in the staying awake, it's in keeping track of how long you've been doing it. With no hourglass, no candle clock, and nothing but sea and sky to guide you, you begin to develop an instinct for how long your watch should last. And the longer you sail, the more precise that instinct becomes. You yawn, glance toward the sail, then toward the prow. Nothing on the horizon, just fog and stars. Maybe the faint outline of land, or maybe your eyes playing tricks again. You recall what Leif said earlier. The first part of night stretches. The second sneaks. The third disappears. You're in the second part now. The sneaking part. The time when sleep tugs hardest at your eyes, and the stars begin their slow, deliberate slide toward morning. The boat creaks under you. The rhythm of waves is steadier now, almost lulling. You take a deep breath. Then you start your internal count. Not numbers. Moments. 1 moment. Leifster snores in his sleep. 2, a gull calls once lonely and off-key. 3, the sail groans in the wind as the boat shifts ever so slightly to port. You've learned not to trust time as a straight line. It's more of a loop. Every watch feels different, yet familiar. You gauge your shift by the events that happen in it. The cold on your hands. The quiet moments when even the sea seems to hold its breath. The point when your thoughts stop making sense and drift into dreams with your eyes still open. That's when you know halfway. You've learned that the hardest part of your shift always hits around then. You fight it, stretch, tap your foot, chew a dried berry you found in a pouch. It tastes like dust and regret, but the texture keeps you awake. Some sailors whisper to themselves during this hour. Others hum or fiddle with knots. You decide to braid a loose cord on your tunic just to feel the minutes pass under your fingers. Historians still puzzle over how Viking sailors managed night shifts without timing tools. Some believe they used songs of a specific length. Others suspect it was pure habit, internal rhythms passed down like oar handling or stew survival. But you're starting to see the truth. You don't track the watch. You become the watch. You learn to feel the shift. You memorize the sequence of events that unfold during your time awake. The sounds, the breeze, the way the boat rocks ever so slightly differently after midnight, that creak near the rudder that happens when the tide turns. And when all those tiny cues align, you know it's time to wake the next man. You cross to Svein crouched awkwardly against a barrel. You nudge his boot. He groans, then nods. You return to your bench, mission complete. Your shift, uncounted, unmeasured, yet known, has ended. You lie back staring at the last few stars, and as your eyes drift shut, you smile. Because in this drifting world of fog and wave and oar, you've just completed another Viking hour, and you didn't need a single tick to prove it. The ship creaks again, but this time it's different. There's a pitch to it, a soft groan of wood stretching under new light. You sit up, blanket slipping from your shoulders, and notice it instantly. The air has changed. Not in smell, not in temperature, in sound. More specifically, the way the boat sounds. The sun isn't up yet, but you can tell it's coming. The planks beneath you, damp for days, have begun drying ever so slightly. The result? A higher note in every groan, every shift of timber, every rub of rope. And just like that, another Viking timekeeping method reveals itself. The sound of wood. You stand slowly, your legs stiff. Step once, creak. Twice, creak. But the creak has tone now. Not just a dull moan, but a sharper, more awake sound. The kind you'd only notice if you'd lived on a boat long enough to grow splinters under your skin. You reach out and tap one of the oar benches with your knuckle. The knock echoes higher than yesterday. Drier, more resonant. Leaf watches you from the side, a smirk curling under his beard. Morning plank, he says. You frown. He nods toward the deck. Wood sings different in the morning. Means the sun's on the way. You kneel, press your palm against the boards. They're no longer cold and damp. They're cool and buzzing. Not literally, but there's a readiness in them. Like the boat itself is preparing to rise with the sky. Historians still argue whether Vikings actively used the sounds of wood to measure time, or whether it was just sailor instinct. But out here, away from clocks and calendars, the creaking hull becomes a living barometer. At night, the wood moans low, heavy with mist and sea spray. At midday it tightens, shortens. Every step clicks like a tightening drum. At dawn it warms, vibrates, plays notes only you and maybe Leif's left knee can hear. You hear a faint pop from the mast as a rope shifts slightly. That's your next clue. Rope shrinkage just a few millimeters as the humidity drops. The tension changes. The sound follows. You stand and walk to the stern, passing the tool crate. It's been sitting there all night, barely disturbed. Now, as the sky brightens behind the fog, you hear it settle. A little shift. A brief scrape of wood on wood. You grin. The boat is waking up. It's not just about sound either. It's about memory. You've walked this deck dozens of times now, slept on it, rode over it. You know where the floorboards groan more in the morning than in the afternoon. You know how the rudder's moan stretches wider before noon. This ship isn't just a vehicle, it's a clock tower on water. Another sailor, Rurik grumpy as ever, rises from his nap, rubs his neck and taps the mast twice. Then he grunts. Feels like fifth hour. You nod. Not because you know he's right, but because the mast feels right. Even the sail still slack above you gives off a sound as it moves. A whisper, soft ripple. Like a blanket being folded slowly. The kind of fabric noise that only appears when the air is drier than it was an hour ago. And you remember something from earlier in the voyage, something the captain said with half a smile. Don't measure the morning with your eyes. Measure it with your feet. You didn't understand him then, but you do now. Because your boots no longer stick to the deck. Your steps echo slightly. The thud of your heel is crisp. The wood is telling you the hour. It's not specific. You couldn't say 5:40 a.m. or even dawn exactly. But you know this is the time when the world begins tilting again, when the boat shrinks back into itself and the ropes stretch like arms after a long nap. This is the hour before light, the hour of tension resetting. You knock once more on the side rail. The sound is hollow, hopeful. Leif chuckles. Plank knows better than the stars. You believe him, because here the boat speaks. And if you learn its language, you'll always know what time it is. There's a new sound now, a sharper one. Click, scrape, snick. You turn expecting some poor soul to be sharpening a blade, but instead you find the captain at the bow, hunched over his shield, with a knife in hand. He's not polishing. He's not carving artwork. He's doing something far more deliberate. He's notching. With each motion, he carves a tiny groove into the rim of his wooden shield. Small, shallow, but distinct. You watch in silence. 1 notch, 2, 3. Leaf sidles up next to you sipping something hot and barely drinkable. He nods toward the captain. Watch count. He murmurs. 1 chip per hour. You glance back. Sure enough, there's a series of old notches circling the shield like the teeth of a gear. Some deeper than others. Some cleaner. You get the impression he's been doing this for years. Maybe decades. It's strangely precise, this savage sundial. The captain finishes the newest mark and pauses, gazing at the fog-thinned horizon. He runs his thumb across the groove, testing its depth. Then he nods to himself, satisfied, and sits down without a word. You finally speak. He keeps track. Leaf shrugs. Only when it matters. Only when it matters. That's the Viking approach to time in a nutshell. You don't track every minute. You don't count just to count. You mark what counts. Hours passed. Watch shifts changed. Storms endured. Land spotted. And in this case, 1 notch for each hour you've sailed since dusk. You walk up to the shield when no one's looking. Run your fingers along the rim. Some of the older notches are almost gone, worn smooth by years of use and countless fingers. Others are fresh crisp. One stands out. It's deeper, wider, angled more aggressively. Leaf steps beside you again. That one. That's when we lost our steerboard to the whale. Nearly turned the boat inside out. He cut that notch with a scream. It's not just a clock. It's a journal. You wonder if this practice is something unique to this ship or something wider. Did all Viking captains mark time like this? Did each notch hold not just an hour, but a memory? Historians don't know for sure. Some have speculated that wooden artifacts, shields, rails, benches served dual purpose, functional in battle or structure, but also encoded with events and cycles. And why not carving a shield rim is far more durable than writing on parchment in the rain. You lean closer. 12 notches. Leif whispers. He starts at dusk. Notches 1 every hour. When the rim circles fully, we land. You do the math. 1 full round, 24 hours. Or maybe just 1 night. It's unclear. But the logic is poetic. 1 revolution of the shield rim marking 1 revolution of the sky. You picture this, a storm in the dark. The crew shouting. Water everywhere. And the captain soaked and grinning, dragging his blade across wood to claim another hour survived. That's not just timekeeping. That's defiance. You like it. Later you catch the captain doing it again. This time slower, less angry, more reflective. He carves the notch, then he rubs it once with his thumb, then walks away. You can't help yourself. You touch the same notch. It's warm. From sunlight, from pressure, from presence. You can't say, but it grounds you. Each groove, each mark, each tiny carved scar represents endurance. Hours aren't just measured, they're earned. They're recorded in something tangible. Something you can count by hand when your mind is too foggy to think. You find your leather strap finger, your own knots. 5. The captain's shield. 12. It's a language of marks. Not in ink, but in action. In survival. You sit beside the shield for a while, letting your eyes trace the pattern. It's like a clock that tells more than time. It tells story, memory, pain, pride. When you sail without clocks, you invent meaning where you can. And sometimes that meaning gets carved into wood and becomes legend. You notice the shift the same way you notice someone staring at you in a quiet room, subtle but certain. The breeze stiffens. The gulls go silent. Even the sea, your constant murmuring companion, seems to draw back in suspicion. Something has changed. The captain glances at the sky, then at his shield, his face tight. Too long. He mutters, "We're late." Late. That's a terrifying word out here. Because without clocks, being late means you guessed wrong. And in Viking sailing, guessing wrong can mean missing land. Missing land means missing food, rest, and safety. It means getting lost at sea, drifting into the open ocean, and praying your raven comes back with more than a sarcastic crack. You feel the tension ripple through the crew. Not panic. Vikings don't panic. But their silence deepens. They shift positions more frequently. One sailor bites his thumb without noticing. Another stares at the sail like he's trying to hear something it's not saying. You scan the horizon again. Nothing. Just gray fog and pale water. The sky is blank, unreadable. You can't tell if it's dawn dusk or something in between. Your stomach churns not from stew this time, but from uncertainty. You whisper, "What happens if we're off?" Leaf doesn't answer right away. He just exhales through his nose like he's letting steam out of a kettle. "Then we drift," he says, "and hope we don't miss the coast." It's terrifying, because here's what no one likes to say out loud. The Viking time-guessing system isn't perfect. It's brilliant. It's poetic. It's deeply rooted in the environment and the senses, but it's still guessing. And when you've been at sea for days relying on animal patterns, star drift, gut pain, and beard knots. While sometimes one of those fails, historians often romanticize Viking navigation, but even sagas speak of ships that never returned, crews that missed Iceland by a day, explorers who swore they were sailing south only to find themselves staring at unfamiliar cliffs with hostile eyes watching from above. You glance at the sail. Still full. Still pulling. The boat is moving. But toward what could we have passed it, you ask? Could have, life says. Could it be ahead? Could be. Do we turn? Not yet. This is the dread hour. The one where you realize how fragile the system is. When you start second-guessing every cue. Was that third raven call truly landfall, or just a confused bird with no bedtime? Was that stew shift really 6 hours ago? Or has your gut given up trying the notches in the captain's shield stop? He hasn't carved one in a while, because to carve now would be to admit you're still counting time, without knowing if it's right. You feel it in your chest, a quiet anxiety. Time is no longer a friendly rhythm. It's a threat. You stand and look over the side. The water here is darker, deeper. Maybe colder. Life joins you, arms crossed. Miss it by an hour and we ride past in fog. Miss it by 2 and we're rowing another day. Miss it by 3. He shrugs. Hope the raven's smarter than we are. You sit again. Now even the old tricks feel like traps. The sunstone wouldn't help. You've got no direct light. The birds are gone. The waves don't feel like they're rocking toward a bay. The boat has entered the hour of doubt. This is the one the sagas don't sing about. You glance at the others. Some pretend to sleep, others stare straight ahead. Their expressions fixed, but their eyes flicking constantly. Every part of your body wants to act, to correct, to adjust the course. But you know the truth, acting without clarity out here is worse than standing still. You breathe, watch the fog, and hope. Because sometimes you get the hour wrong. Sometimes the nose shadow lies. The stew comes early. The gulls skip their scheduled scream. And when that happens, you're left with nothing but silence, wind, and the sound of your own doubt echoing off the sail. You're not lost, not yet. But you're not found either. You're in the gap, the unmeasured hour. And it stretches wider with every silent oar stroke. And then, just as doubt reaches its fullest shape, long, quiet, heavy, it breaks. Not with fanfare. Not with a bird scream or a thunderclap or Leif bursting into tears of joy. Just a shimmer. A tremble in the sky. A breath held and then released. The northern lights. Faint at first, just the barest ribbon of greenish light almost indistinguishable from the fog. Then more. The shimmer strengthens, gliding across the sky like someone is painting the night with a single smooth brushstroke. You sit up, breath caught. The whole crew turns to look. Even the captain's frown eases just a little. The aurora isn't a timekeeper, not directly. It doesn't tell you if it's 5 in the morning or nearly noon. But out here, when every cue becomes sacred, even the shimmer of solar particles becomes a kind of signal. This is late watch, life murmurs. It always comes then. You stare up at the sky. He's right. It's strange to think of the northern lights as part of a schedule. But out here they become one. They don't appear every night. But when they do, it's always during the deepest hours. The hours when only the true night watch remains, when others have gone still, when the stars blink a little slower. Historians still wrestle with how the Vikings interpreted auroras. Some sagas describe them as shields of the Valkyries. Others call them the fox's breath, a glowing trail kicked up by the mythical Arctic fox racing across the mountains. But among sailors, they were signs. Not of magic, though plenty believed that too, but of timing. Because when the lights danced, it meant night had settled completely, and it meant you'd made it this far. You let your eyes follow the arc of green as it stretches and bends above the mast. It ripples like fabric. Then another band joins it, faint red this time. The crew watches in silence, reverent. Even Rurik wipes his nose gently as if afraid to make noise. The lights don't help you navigate, but they mark something. This is the final hour before the sky starts to pale again. The hour before the birds wake, before your stomach groans, before the boat begins creaking in the rising warmth. This is the Viking twilight, neither dusk nor dawn, just movement above and below. And there's something else. When the lights appear, sleep no longer tempts you, not because you're fully awake, but because your body recognizes this as a checkpoint. You wait it out. You watch. You absorb. The aurora becomes your ritual. Some sailors believe that when the lights vanish, your shift ends. That's not written down. It's not logged in any saga. But you see the way life shifts when the shimmer fades. The way the captain finally carves a new notch into his shield. The way even the sea seems to stretch a little deeper, like it too has been holding its breath. You exhale. This hour is fleeting. By the time the lights vanish completely, the fog has lightened. The air is clearer. The boat creaks higher again. Wood-warming ropes tightening. A hint of pink brushes the clouds behind you. And someone somewhere whispers, "Sun's not far now." You look at your leather strap. You almost tie a knot. But instead you just smile. The lights told you enough. No clock. No count. Just the sky deciding to dance one last time before the world wakes. The sea feels different now, lighter somehow. You blink. The sky has shifted again, slowly sneaking from slate gray into soft lavender, then into a pale pearly blue. Not a burst of color, just a gentle creeping glow that brushes the tips of the waves and begins to dry the cold off your skin. And then you see it. Land. Just a thin line at first, barely more than a suggestion, like someone drew a smudge with charcoal on the horizon. But it sharpens with each passing oar stroke. Hills low and gentle. A dark slash of rock. Some trees, if your eyes aren't deceiving you. You hear a collective breath. Relief may be all. But no one shouts, because this is moon timing. The final trick in a long, exhausting series of Viking guesses. The moon is just now tucking itself away behind you, sliding into the morning, like a guest, sneaking out early from a feast. It hangs low, swollen, and dull, its silver light barely noticeable now that the sun is threatening to return. Yet, it's been your guide all through the night. You didn't realize it at first. Too focused on stew cramps and sail shadows and beard knots. But somewhere between the 4th and 5th Raven Pass, the moon began playing its role. You think back to the night before the moon was higher, brighter. You remember seeing it through the mast, perfectly framed between two lines of rope. Now it's fading low on the opposite side of the boat. And just like the stars, the moon moves but at its own slower pace. Viking sailors knew this. Even if they couldn't write it down in charts, they understood the pattern. Moon behind one last third of night. Moon setting. Approach to dawn. Moonlight on water. Shallow tide often good for landfall. You hear Leaf mutter something. Pull with the tide. Moon's telling us where. The ship groans as the crew leans into the oars, energy returning to their arms with every glimpse of shoreline. The wind changes cooler now, brushing from the direction of the beach. A fresh kind of smell drifts in sand-wet stone pine. Someone behind you whispers, "Made it." You don't respond. You're still watching the moon. You realize that without even trying, you've been timing your approach. The ship's shadow, earlier stretched across the star-speckled water, now shortens as the sky lightens. The moonlight fades. The horizon sharpens. You count the indicators like someone checking a clock face. Low moon, warm wind, smell of pine check. Check, check. Historians still debate how deeply the Vikings relied on the moon, especially compared to stars and sun. Some say it was secondary. Others believe it was central especially for long-haul voyages. The Norse calendar itself was lunar-based after all, each month tied to phases of the moon. Sailors likely learned to read not just the phase, but the angle, the hue, the quality of the light it cast across the water. And today, it was just accurate enough. You grip your oar and help pull. The rhythm is off now, less methodical, more eager. You're close. You can feel it in the water. The depth has changed. The resistance is different. The boat lifts more on each stroke. The bottom is getting near. Rurik taps the side of the hull twice. We'll scrape sand in 15. He's guessing, but it sounds right. A gull screams overhead, one, then two, then a flock. Your stomach growls in reply. The boat slides forward. The beach draws near. You can almost see the dark rocks breaking the waves. The moon is nearly gone. And in its place, the soft outline of the rising sun begins to stretch across the cloud line, not yet bright, but bold enough to push shadows away. This was your last cue, the last measure. And you made it. No timepieces, no coordinates, just wave rhythm, bird timing, beard knots, raven paths, gut turns, aurora shimmer, shield notches, sail shadows, soup warnings, star drifts, and the pale final whisper of the moon. The boat grinds slightly, a low scrape. Everyone exhales. You've landed, not on a dot on a map, but on a moment, a timed guest-earned moment. The end of the journey, marked not by minutes, but by memory. The hull touches land with the sound of wet wood kissing sand, a muffled scrape, followed by silence. Then, everything begins to move at once. The oars are stowed. The sail lowers with a tired flump. Ropes are coiled gear, gathered cloaks pulled tighter against the early chill. No one speaks loudly. There's no whoop of celebration, no final cheer. Just the soft practiced shuffle of men who have arrived exactly as they meant to, even if they're not entirely sure how. You swing your legs over the edge and feel your boots sink into the cold wetness of shore. It's uneven ground, pebbled, seaweed-laced, packed from tides and time. But it's solid. And after days of moving in rhythm with the sea, the earth feels strange beneath your feet. Still, steady, absolute. You exhale slowly. The breath leaves you as a mist curling upward in the still dim air. The others step off in turn, some stretch, some immediately head inland to scout. One sits down right where the tide has stopped and starts humming that same lullaby you heard on the second night. And you look up. The sky is blooming now. Soft oranges and purples ripple outward from the eastern edge, painting the clouds in streaks. The fog is burning away. A few stars remain blinking goodbye. Even the moon is a memory already hidden behind the trees that border the new land. It's quiet. Not because nothing's happening, but because everything has happened. You made it here without hours or minutes. Without compasses or countdowns. Just signs, feelings, shared wisdom. And trust. You walk a few steps up the beach and turn back to look at the ship. She sits in the shallows like a sleeping beast, weathered, scraped proud. The sail is tied now. The mast leans slightly, as if it too is ready for rest. And on the bow, where dew still clings to wood, you spot something small, a line of faded chalk marks. Maybe from a past voyage. Maybe just someone's idea of fun. You count them. 25. 25 hours. Days' stories. You smile. Then you check your strap. 7 knots. You run your fingers over each one, remembering when you tied them. 1 for morning fog. 1 for the sunstone guess. 1 for the stew. 1 for the raven. 1 for the shield notch. 1 for the star shift. And 1, just now, for the arrival. You take a final breath of the cold, earthy air and let your eyes soften. Because now, it's over. The guessing, the watching, the wondering. You're on land. And time, that strange floating thing you've been chasing and sensing and sinking with, suddenly doesn't matter anymore. Because here on this beach with the sea behind you and the sun just beginning to rise, there are no more tricks, no more cues, only warmth, only stillness, only rest. And now, after all that drifting on waves and wind and guesses and gut feelings, you've made it to shore. You've walked the last steps of the journey. The stars have bowed out. The moon has tucked behind the hills. The birds have begun their morning chorus and the sea has gone quiet. Everything softens now. The oars are dry. The stew's been packed away. The ropes no longer creak, they rest like sleeping snakes in the bottom of the boat. And you're still grounded and weightless all at once. The signs that guided you shadows, smells, whispers in the wood. The tilt of birds and drift of fish fade gently from the front of your mind. You no longer need to track or measure or adjust. The sky's pale, the sand is cool, and the world asks for nothing. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath come slower, longer, lighter. You are safe now, on land, on solid, steady earth. The fog has lifted not just from the sea, but from your mind. There's no need to worry if you're late or early or in between. Because out here in the quiet space between night and morning, there is no wrong hour, only this one. So drift, sink, float in stillness, not sea. You've done enough. Let the world turn without you for a little while. You'll be here resting like a longship after voyage. Time can wait. Sleep, sailor. Sleep.